Every European schoolchild learns that the Cold War was a contest between democracy and totalitarianism, a struggle in which NATO stood as the shield of the free world against Soviet aggression. The alliance is portrayed as a defensive coalition of sovereign nations, bound by treaty and guided by elected governments. Its soldiers are taught to fight foreign invaders, not their own citizens. And its intelligence services are remembered as protectors of liberty, not architects of domestic terror. But on August 3, 1990, Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti stood before the Chamber of Deputies in Rome and confirmed what had been whispered for decades across 12 nations. A secret paramilitary network had been operating inside Italy since 1956, coordinated by NATO and the CIA. Armed with weapons caches hidden in forests and mountain meadows, trained in unconventional warfare on remote Mediterranean islands and at British and American special operations centers, and composed of recruits who included ex-fascists and neo-fascists from the Italian far right. The network was called Gladio, the Latin word for sword. Similar networks existed in every NATO country in Western Europe. Question: why? Did the European Parliament pass a formal resolution in November 1990 condemning these networks as clandestine parallel intelligence and armed operations organizations, only for most member states to refuse any investigation at all? How did a continent-wide secret army, funded by the CIA and MI6, trained to resist Soviet invasion, become instead the operational backbone of a strategy of tension that killed hundreds of European civilians in bombings blamed on the political left? To understand the architecture of this deception, one must examine the stage upon which it was performed. The stay-behind doctrine emerged from a straightforward Cold War scenario. If the Soviet Union invaded Western Europe and NATO forces were pushed back, someone needed to remain behind the lines to conduct sabotage, gather intelligence, and support resistance movements. The same function the British Special Operations Executive and the American OSS had performed against Nazi occupation during World War II. The concept was defensive in origin. Weapons caches were buried across Western Europe. In Italy alone, 139 cache sites were eventually disclosed. 10 of them could not be recovered in 1973 because they had been hidden in locations requiring complex demolition work. The networks were to activate only after a Soviet invasion. Their members were civilians, mostly vetted for anti-communist reliability, trained in guerrilla warfare and communications. But the invasion never came. And the networks, armed and funded and hidden from parliaments and publics, did not remain idle. The beneficiaries of their activation were not foreign occupiers, but domestic political actors. The Italian Communist Party was one of the largest in Western Europe, polling regularly above 30%. In Belgium, the left was gaining strength. In Greece, Turkey, and Portugal, socialist and communist movements threatened the Cold War order. What was erased from the public memory was the documented shift in purpose that occurred not after the networks were created, but encoded into their founding documents. A classified 1959 CFAR document described guerrilla action against domestic threats as part of the operational mandate from inception. The shift from anti-Soviet defense to domestic political warfare was not a corruption of the mission, it was the mission. The investigative core of this story rests on documents and confessions that no court has successfully suppressed, though many have tried. In 1984, Italian magistrate Felice Casson reopened the case of the 1972 Petiano bombing, done in which 3 carabinieri had been killed by a car bomb. The attack had been initially blamed on left-wing terrorists. Casson discovered that the bombing had been carried out by a far-right militant named Vincenzo Vinciguerra, that Italian officials had deliberately misdirected the investigation to implicate the left, and that the explosives used matched materials from a NATO stay-behind arms cache. Vinciguerra testified at his trial with a clarity that still chills. He said, and I quote directly, "You had to attack civilians, the people, women, children, innocent people, unknown people, far removed from any political game." The reason was quite simple: to force the Italian public to turn to the state to ask for greater security. This is the political logic that lies behind all the massacres and the bombings which remain unpunished, because the state cannot condemn itself. Vinciguerra was sentenced to life imprisonment, but his testimony forced Casson into the archives, where he found the 1959 CFAR document confirming Gladio's existence, its NATO coordination, and its CIA partnership. This was not a rogue operation, it was institutional. The pattern Casson uncovered matched a series of bombings and massacres that defined Italy's years of lead from 1969 to 1980. The 1969 Piazza Fontana bombing in Milan killed 17 people. The 1974 Piazza della Loggia bombing in Brescia killed 8. The 1974 Italicus Express train bombing killed 12. And on August 2nd, 1980, the Bologna railway station bombing, the deadliest terrorist attack in post-war Italian history, killed 85 and wounded more than 200. In each case, the initial investigation implicated the far left. In each case, subsequent investigations found far-right operatives with intelligence service connections. The Bologna bombing carries the strongest documented connection to Gladio and the P2 Masonic Lodge. Licio Gelli, Grand Master of P2, and Pietro Musumeci, Deputy Director of Italian Military Intelligence, were both convicted of obstructing the investigation. Gelli's P2 network and the Gladio stay-behind network overlapped significantly in personnel. Military officers, intelligence officials, and far-right operatives who appeared on one list frequently appeared on the other. The structural relationship between P2 and Gladio was the link between a political conspiracy and an operational one. Belgium's stay-behind network, codenamed SDRA-8, came under investigation after the Brabant massacres, a series of supermarket shootings between 1982 and 1985 that killed 28 people. With military precision, often leaving valuable cash behind, designed to terrorize rather than rob. Belgian Defense Minister Guy Coem confirmed the existence of the Belgian stay-behind army in November 1990. The Swiss network P26 was discovered months before Andreotti's speech and exposed as extremist in ideology. Swiss Defense Minister Caspar Villiger resigned. The Swedish stay-behind network was acknowledged by General Bengt Gustafsson in 1990, who denied NATO or CIA involvement, a denial contradicted by CIA officer Paul Garbler, who confirmed Sweden was a direct participant. In every country where parliamentary investigations took place, the pattern was identical. The legacy of Gladio did not dissolve with the Cold War. It created a template for how democratic states could maintain clandestine armies outside constitutional oversight. You fund them through intelligence black budgets and deploy them for domestic political warfare while maintaining the fiction of democratic accountability. The European Parliament responded to Andreotti's disclosure by passing Resolution B32022190 in November 1990, condemning the existence of a clandestine parallel intelligence and armed operations organization which escaped all democratic controls, may have interfered illegally in the internal political affairs of member states, and have at their disposal independent arsenals and military resources, thereby jeopardizing the democratic structures of the countries in which they are operating. The resolution called for independent judicial and parliamentary investigations into Gladio in every European state. But aside from inquiries in Belgium, Italy, and Switzerland, nothing of substance materialized. Investigators heavily redacted their findings while avoiding having them translated into English. In 2006, the United States State Department published a communique stating that claims the United States ordered, supported, or authorized terrorism by stay-behind units were rehashed former Soviet disinformation. The denial was issued 16 years after Andreotti's parliamentary confession and 4 years after the European Parliament's formal condemnation. In 2021, Italian military intelligence colonel Antonio Giucci gave an interview acknowledging the strong presence of US military intelligence in Rome, and cryptically noting that if someone had used Gladio for other purposes, it was their personal responsibility. He referred to the official purpose of Gladio as a clandestine stay-behind sabotage force, to be activated only in the event of Soviet invasion, while admitting that in our plans, in the event of an invasion, it was planned that we would abandon part of the territory to position ourselves on more defensible lines. The state cannot condemn itself. Who covers it up today? Not a single conspirator, but an Atlantic alliance that has never formally acknowledged the resolution it was condemned by. A European Union that has never enforced the investigations it demanded, and an educational apparatus across the continent that still teaches the Cold War as a clean moral contest, rather than a period in which democratic governments funded secret armies to bomb their own citizens. So here is the question I leave you with tonight. Should the European Union establish a permanent independent tribunal with subpoena power to investigate all remaining classified Gladio documents across member states? Or is this just a dangerous reopening of Cold War wounds that would serve no present purpose and destabilize the alliances that keep Europe secure?